Imagine scrolling through headlines, your heart racing with uncertainty. In the past year, searches for end times and Jesus' return have increased by 300% on YouTube. With wars, natural disasters, and global uncertainty, many are wondering if Christ's return is near. Here's the shocking truth. Most popular end times teachings contradict Scripture itself. Today I'm breaking down what Jesus actually said about his return in Matthew 24-25, and I promise it will surprise you. I'll show you the difference between biblical signs and sensationalism, and share how one man in our church went from end times obsession to living with incredible purpose and peace. His story might just change how you view the future. Have you ever stayed up late watching YouTube videos about the end times? You're definitely not alone. The problem is, most of what we hear creates more fear than faith. Let me ask you something. How many times have you felt that knot in your stomach after hearing someone predict that this is it, that we're living in the final days, that anxiety isn't what Jesus intended for us? Yet somehow, we've created this culture where Christians are constantly scanning headlines, looking for signs of the apocalypse instead of finding peace in Scripture. It's crazy how different the sensationalized end times predictions on social media are from what Jesus actually taught. While YouTube prophets are busy pointing to blood moons and political figures as the Antichrist, Jesus spoke about readiness, faithfulness, and not being caught up in fear. I recently spoke with a woman named Sarah who became so convinced the world was ending in 2012 that she cashed out her retirement savings to prepare. She built an underground bunker, stockpiled food, and pulled her kids out of college. Sarah's extreme actions highlight how easily fear can disrupt not only finances, but also family bonds. When 2013 arrived, she faced financial ruin and damaged relationships, all because of predictions that never materialized. Did you know that about 41% of Americans believe we're living in the end times right now? That's nearly half the country walking around with this weight on their shoulders. This apocalyptic mindset is like trying to navigate life wearing foggy glasses. Everything becomes distorted by fear, affecting our major life decisions and mental health. Throughout history, Christians have repeatedly believed they were the final generation. From the Black Plague to the Great Disappointment of 1844, these false alarms have left trails of broken faith in their wake. This end times anxiety affects real decisions in our daily lives. Believers avoid financial planning, put off education, or delay marriage because they're convinced there's no point. Can you imagine putting your entire life on hold because of predictions that repeatedly fail? Here's the real problem. This obsession with figuring out when Jesus is returning actually distracts us from what he called us to do while we wait. Instead of advancing his kingdom, we're busy decoding headlines. What if Jesus' teachings about his return weren't meant to send us spiraling into panic, but to bring us peace and hope in the midst of trouble? When we look at what Jesus himself says, he focused on readiness rather than timelines. He emphasized faithful living over fearful watching. In Matthew 24, Jesus warns about deception first, almost as if he knew we'd be tempted to follow end-time speculators instead of his words. Now let's look at what Scripture actually teaches about recognizing true signs versus getting caught up in false predictions. What if I told you that Jesus spent more time warning about false prophets than he did describing the actual signs of his return? It's crazy how often we miss this. When it comes to the end times, Jesus wants to protect us from being led astray. Let's look at Matthew 24, where Jesus gives his most detailed teaching about his return. Notice how he starts, not with exciting signs and wonders, but with a warning. Many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. Like a smoke detector that signals danger before you see flames, Jesus alerts us to deception as the primary threat. He was essentially saying, before you start looking for signs, guard your heart against lies. In today's world, this warning hits differently. Anyone with a YouTube channel can claim special revelation about the end times. We're bombarded with sensationalized interpretations, blood moons, Middle East conflicts, and suddenly everyone's convinced Jesus is coming back next Tuesday. Jesus gave us clear guidance on distinguishing truth from hype. In Matthew 24:25, he outlines signs like wars famines, and persecution, but emphasizes readiness through faithful living rather than anxious speculation. He tells the parable of 10 virgins waiting for a bridegroom. 5 prepared for a long wait, 5 weren't. The wise ones brought extra oil for their lamps. Think about it. The wise virgins were equipped for the journey, not just excited about the destination. It's like preparing for a cross-country trek rather than anxiously checking your watch for a bus that might never come. Jesus teaches that true readiness isn't about having perfect prophecy charts. It's having a heart that remains faithful even when his return seems delayed. This matches what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5. Be alert and sober-minded by putting on faith and love as a breastplate and hope of salvation as a helmet. Scripture consistently emphasizes character development over timeline calculations. So how can you spot false prophets today? True teachers point to Jesus and encourage faithful service. They don't create fear or set dates. They don't profit from anxiety. Instead, they teach what Scripture actually says, that while the exact timing remains unknown, we can live with confidence and purpose now. The answer isn't ignoring end times teaching. It's understanding it correctly. Jesus didn't give us prophecy to frighten us, but to prepare us. His warnings make us purposeful, not paranoid. When we grasp what Jesus actually taught about his return, we find peace, not panic. Mission, not fear. Faithful living, not fearful watching. Sometimes proper understanding and proper living are two different things. Just ask James. His journey began with legitimate questions about the end times, but what started as curiosity quickly transformed into something much darker. For 5 long years, his life revolved around apocalyptic predictions, doomsday preparations, and an overwhelming sense that the world could end at any moment. I started by just wanting to be prepared, James told me when I interviewed him. I'd watched these YouTube videos about blood moons and Middle East conflicts, and something inside me just snapped. Before I knew it, my garage was filled with canned goods, water purifiers, and enough supplies to last through any disaster. James was stockpiling both food and fear. His obsession consumed every aspect of his life. His wife nearly left when he spent their vacation savings on emergency supplies. His embarrassed kids stopped bringing friends home, and coworkers avoided his constant warnings about imminent doom. The breaking point came during my daughter's 10th birthday, James explained, his voice cracking. Instead of enjoying the celebration, I spent the entire time checking news alerts, convinced a major prophetic event was unfolding. When I saw the disappointment in my daughter's eyes, something finally clicked. This wasn't what Jesus intended for me. In that painful moment, the overwhelming fear gave way to the search for true peace. The anxiety consuming him completely contradicted what Jesus promised his followers. How could this constant dread be what Jesus wanted? So James took a radical step. He set aside all end times books, unsubscribed from prophecy channels, and went straight to the source. He began studying what Jesus actually taught about his return rather than relying on sensationalist interpretations. I was shocked by what I found, James said. Jesus wasn't trying to scare me into hiding. He was calling me to purposeful living. When I read the parable about servants being entrusted with resources until their master's return, my thinking transformed. Jesus wasn't saying, panic until I come. He was saying, occupy until I come. This realization liberated James from fear. He redirected his energy into faithful service, volunteering at his church's food pantry, mentoring young men struggling with anxiety, and using his preparedness skills to help his community after a severe storm. The freedom came when I stopped asking, when will Jesus return? And started asking, how can I be found faithful when he returns? James explained. That shift in focus, from timing to faithfulness, transformed James from a man paralyzed by fear to one empowered by purpose. His relationships healed, his faith deepened, and he found himself more truly prepared for Christ's return than he ever was during his years of anxious stockpiling. Imagine living each day with unwavering purpose. How would that change your life? Here's the beautiful truth. Jesus isn't returning to catch us by surprise, but to welcome home those who've been advancing his kingdom through faithful service. Mark 13 guides us with practical wisdom. Live in the light of Christ's coming, discern false teachings, and actively spread the gospel. What if we shifted from asking, "Is this the end?" to "Am I using everything God's given me to advance his kingdom?" Romans 13:12 reminds us, "The night is nearly over, the day is almost here." When fear transforms into faith, we live ready for his return, encouraging one another and remaining faithful in our unique callings. Are you ready? Stay blessed by the best, my friends.